Thaddeus Stevens, April 4, 1792 to August 11, 1868, was a member of the United States House of Representatives from Pennsylvania, one of the leaders of the radical Republican faction of the Republican Party during the 1860s. A fierce opponent of slavery and discrimination against Black Americans, Stevens sought to secure their rights during Reconstruction, leading the opposition to U.S. President Andrew Johnson. As chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee during the American Civil War, he played a leading role, focusing his attention on defeating the Confederacy, financing the war with new taxes and borrowing, crushing the power of slave owners, ending slavery, and securing equal rights for the freedmen. Stevens argued that slavery should not survive the war. He was frustrated by the slowness of U.S. President Abraham Lincoln to support his position. He guided the government's financial legislation through the House as Ways and Means chairman. As the war progressed towards a Northern victory, Stevens came to believe that not only should slavery be abolished, but that Black Americans should be given a stake in the South's future through the confiscation of land from planters to be distributed to the freedmen. His plans went too far for the moderate Republicans and were not enacted. In Pennsylvania, Stevens taught school at the York Academy and continued his studies for the bar. Local lawyers passed a resolution barring from membership anyone who had followed any other profession while preparing for admission, a restriction likely aimed at Stevens. Undaunted, he reportedly, according to a story he often retold, presented himself and 4 bottles of Madeira wine to the examining board in nearby Harford County, Maryland. Few questions were asked, but much wine was drunk. He left Bel Air the next morning with a certificate allowing him, through reciprocity, to practice law anywhere. Stevens then went to Gettysburg, the seat of Adams County, where he opened an office in September 1816. Stevens knew no one in Gettysburg and initially had little success as a lawyer. His breakthrough, in mid-1817, was a case in which a farmer who had been jailed for debt later killed one of the constables who had arrested him. His defense, although unsuccessful, impressed the local people, and he never lacked for business thereafter. During the Confederate incursion into the North in mid-1863 that culminated in the Battle of Gettysburg, Confederates twice sent parties to Stevens's Caledonia forge. Stevens, who had been there supervising operations, was hastened away by his workers against his will. General Jubal early looted and vandalized the forge, causing a loss to Stevens of about $80,000. Early said that the North had done the same to Southern figures and that Stevens was well known for his vindictiveness towards the South. Asked if he would have taken the congressman to Libby Prison in Richmond, Early replied that he would have hanged Stevens and divided his bones among the Confederate states. Stevens pushed Congress to pass a constitutional amendment abolishing slavery. The Emancipation Proclamation was a wartime measure, did not apply to all slaves, and might be reversed by peacetime courts. An amendment would be slavery's end. The 13th Amendment outlawed slavery and involuntary servitude except as a punishment for crime, easily passed the Senate but failed in the House in June. Fears that it might not pass delayed a renewed attempt there. Lincoln campaigned aggressively for the amendment after his re-election in 1864, and Stevens described his December annual message to Congress as the most important and best message that has been communicated to Congress for the last 60 years. The amendment passed narrowly after heavy pressure exerted by Lincoln himself, along with offers of political appointments from the Seward lobby. Democrats made allegations of bribery. Stevens worked closely with Lincoln administration officials on legislation to finance the war. Within a day of his appointment as Ways and Means chairman, he had reported a bill for a war loan. Stevens steered a bill to enfranchise African Americans in the District of Columbia through the House. The Senate passed it in 1867, and it was enacted over Johnson's veto. Congress was downsizing the Army for peacetime. Stevens offered an amendment, which became part of the bill as enacted, to have 2 regiments of African American cavalry. His solicitude for African Americans extended to the Native American. Stevens was successful in defeating a bill to place reservations under state law, noting that the Native people had often been abused by the states. When interviewed by a reporter seeking to gain his life story, Stevens replied, "I have no history. My lifelong regret is that I have lived so long and so uselessly." Nevertheless, in his last formal speech to the House, Stevens stated that man still is vile. But such large steps have lately been taken in the true direction that the patriot has a right to take courage. When Congress adjourned in late July, Stevens remained in Washington, too ill to return to Pennsylvania. Stevens was in pain from his stomach ailments, from swollen feet, and from dropsy. By early August, he was unable to leave the house. He still received some visitors, though, and correctly predicted to his friend and former student Simon Stevens, no relation, that Grant would win the election. On the afternoon of August 11th, his doctor warned that he would probably not last through the night. His longtime housekeeper and companion, Lydia Hamilton Smith, his nephew Thaddeus, and friends gathered by him. 2 black preachers came to pray by him, telling him that he had the prayers of all their people. He sucked on ice to try to soothe the pain. His last words were a request for more of it. Thaddeus Stevens died on the night of August 11, 1868, as the old day departed.